Hey guys, Marty here. Today's video is about the Atlas. As a disclaimer, if you're a new player, I really would recommend not watching this video immediately, or if you're going to watch the video, use it more as a reference point rather than following it verbatim or anything like that. If you're new, I recommend just experiencing all of the maps on the Atlas. When I was new, my friends recommended I do a shaped Atlas strategy, and it really confused me. I ended up setting it up, but I felt like I didn't get to experience what maps, and I didn't really understand why the maps that I was supposed to be running were the ones I was supposed to be running. In Legacy League, I tried out a different strategy. I ran a bunch of different red tier maps, and I found some that I really enjoyed. And some of them are maps that I run to this day a lot, or at least until they got nerfed. So I would highly recommend, if you're a new player, just work your way through the Atlas. At the end of the day, it's all interchangeable. You are never locked into your decisions. For example, if you want to remove a map from the Atlas, you can vendor 3 of the corresponding sextant and a scour, and it will give you a seal which you can use to remove a map from your Atlas. So your Atlas is never actually bricked. You can also vendor 20 chisels and 5 regrets, and this will give you an unshaping orb. You can use the unshaping orb to remove your shaped map. So for example, right now I have shaped Volcano. If I were to use an unshaping orb on Volcano right now, it would return Volcano to a tier 4 map. Shaping a map increases the tier by 5. And then I would be able to talk to Zana to take my Shaper's Orb back. So there's no punishment for choosing the wrong maps. You can always reset it, and in every 3 months in this game, there's a new league. So each league is a full reset, and you can choose a completely different strategy. So you should never feel too bad about choosing the wrong strategy or anything like that. Just save up some money and change it if you feel the need to. I'm not going to be talking about what maps you should be running in this video. I think that that's the wrong way to teach someone the Atlas. I think you should run whatever maps you personally enjoy. If you really like running cells, even though the majority of the community don't like it, run cells. It has great density, and you can get rich from playing any map as long as you enjoy farming it. You can also get good experience in pretty much any map as long as the tiers are high enough. So in any tier of map, there's about 10 maps or more. And just pick any of them and run any of them, and it's totally fine. I will talk about how to sustain the maps. I'll be talking about choosing an Atlas strategy. I'll be talking about some of the mechanics you can use in SSF versus Trade League to help influence your Atlas progression. And I'll talk about how to sustain or obtain Shaper Orbs initially. So to get started, we're going to talk about how to obtain Shaper Orbs, some of the strategies that you can use. This ties in with the SSF at Trade League thing, but the way you obtain your Shaper's Orbs is your initial Shaper's Orb. You have to run 5 Shaper influence maps. So right now you can see Grotto, Channel, Gorge, Wharf, and Laboratory are all Shaper influenced on my Atlas. I would need to run 5 maps of the corresponding tiers for 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then I would need to run a tier 6 or higher Shaper influence map to get my first orb. So if you run a tier 1 map with Shaper influence, and then you run another tier 1 map with Shaper influence, this will not count as 2 maps. This will be 1 map towards the completion of the spawning of your initial Shaper's Orb. So you need to run a tier 1, then a tier 2, then a tier 3, then a tier 4, then a tier 5, then a tier 6. However, if you run a tier 4 when you still need to run your tier 1 and 2, it will count as a tier 1 map for the intents of progressing your Atlas. So you can use this. Say I had none of them completed right now. I could run Grotto, then I could run Gorge, then I could run Channel, and then I could run Wharf. And that would be 4 out of my 5 maps. So now I would need to run a tier 5 and then a tier 6, and then I would get my initial Shaper's Orb. Once you've got your initial Shaper's Orb, your tier 6 Shaper map you run, you will then spawn Elder, which you can see up here in the top of my map. And all of your Shaper's Orbs from here on out will be obtained from Elder. So my tier 7 Shaper's Orb, or tier 2 Shaper's Orb, the one that upgrades to a tier 7, I would obtain that from Residence, Courtyard, or Temple, because it's always a map of the tier or higher. And it also works for shaped maps. You can no longer do this on your friend's Atlas. You have to do it on your Atlas. They made that change in the current league Incursion. So what this means is right now I have Shaped Beach. If I were to have Shaped Desert and Elder was influencing Desert, then I could run Shaped Desert and it would give me my tier 2 Shaper's Orb. This is applicable to all maps going forward, so you can either get them from the tier that it corresponds with the orb, or you can get it from a shaped map of a lower tier. So you can utilize this, if, for example, if you're in solo self-found, to not have to unlock red maps and still get your Shaper's Orb that corresponds to a red map. For example, right now I have Shaped Volcano. If I trade 3 Shaped Volcanoes in, I get a Shaped Sulfur Vents. So if I had Elder on Sulfur Vents, I could get my tier 10 Shaper's Orb, or my tier 5 Shaper's Orb, however you want to look at it. Sorry, it's a little confusing. I always refer to it as the higher tier. So for the rest of the video, if I say tier 10 Shaper's Orb, just assume that I mean the orb that upgrades a tier 5 map into a tier 10 map, and so on. So anyways, now that I've got this Sulfur Vents, I run this, and I will have my 5th Shaper's Orb, but I won't have any tier 10 maps unlocked. So you can do this to set up your atlas without unlocking a bunch of maps that you'll have to remove. You can continue to do that. So if I were to trade in 3 Sulfur Vents, I'll show you that right here. So if I trade 3 shaped Sulfur Vents, it will give me a shaped Ashen Wood. Now, this is good because let's say I have Elder on Ashen Wood. Now I can get my tier 11 Shaper's Orb without having to unlock any red tier maps. And red sextants are much harder to obtain. If you're in Trade League, you can buy them, obviously, but having to remove red tier maps is much more expensive than having to remove yellow tier maps or white tier maps. So it's important to know about this mechanic to save yourself some money. Also to save yourself a lot of time if you're in solo self-found, because the orbs are a lot harder, or the sextants are a lot harder to get, and progressing through red maps is a lot harder. Getting Elder to the specific red map that you need is harder. And you can move your shape maps at any time. Like I said, vendoring the 20 chisels and the regret allows you to unshape a map. So right now, my Elder's over here. If I wanted to vendor or remove my Volcano and shape Strand instead, I could save up 3 strands by running random tier 8 maps, or my shape tier 8 map, or tier 7 maps off the boss. I could get 3 shaped strands, and I could trade them up into a shaped Ancient City. Once my Elder influence moves over to shaped Ancient City, I could run that map and get my tier 10 orb from there. And you can apply this to any position on the atlas. You can get all your orbs this way. If you're in Trade League, you can do something really nice, which is you can buy other people's shaped maps. So you could say ask a friend to shape Residence for you if he has already unlocked this map. So he farms up 3 shaped residences. You vendor your 3 shaped residences into a courtyard, or you run the shaped residence if you just need one because you want your tier 7 orb or tier 12 orb. You run this shaped residence from your friend, you get your Shaper's Orb. Great. You know, Trade League's amazing for that kind of stuff. The new Elder, it's no longer fixed in its position. If you ignore Elder long enough, it'll respawn somewhere else on the map. So this is actually really nice and a really annoying thing. If, for example, you're in solo self-found and you've shaped your strand to 3-to-1 into Ancient Cities, and your Elder ends up moving down to here right when you've got your 3 strands, that's going to be really annoying. But if you're in Trade League, this is a great mechanic because you're not locked into, like, who's going to have shaped residence or courtyard or temple or arena right now? Probably not too many people. You might be able to buy the maps, or you might be able to get a friend to do it, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult than if it were over here where there's some more typically shaped maps. But as a result of that, you know, your Elder's going to be constantly moving from all parts around the atlas, and you can just buy the maps that correspond at the given time. You don't need to worry too much about where it spawns. And, you know, that's really nice. And it also removed a mechanic that I made a previous video about called the Elder Ring. It's no longer possible. Yeah, you don't need to even think about that. So that being said, you can also move the Elder yourself. Eventually, if I were to run any map on the atlas, Elder and Shaper would start to battle it out. Elder would influence more maps. Shaper would be pushing him back. When Shaper spawns in a map near it, so for example, if Shaper were influencing fields right now, I could run fields, and Elder would take over the fields when I run it. However, while I'm doing this, Shaper can also be taking over other maps. So if Shaper was also on Cursed Crypt, then Shaper could fight back Elder from Cursed Crypt and take out Temple. And if I had Elder going all the way over here, when it, like, let's say Elder reaches to Underground River, when I take over the fields and Elder takes back the Temple, I'm going to lose all of this Elder over here. So it's important to know that that will happen and not get stressed out by it. That's just a part of the game. Now that I've explained kind of how to obtain the orbs, I'd like to talk about the Atlas strategies. So first of all, I want to talk about Atlas mechanics. There is a very important mechanic in the Atlas right now, which is the way the maps drop. So Ashen Woods, we can see it's connected to barrows, lava chamber, and sulfur vents. So if I were to run Ashen Wood without lava chamber unlocked, without sulfur vents unlocked, and with barrows unlocked, I could still drop sulfur vents and lava chamber. That's why you can see these connections, and that's how you unlock maps that you don't have. When you start out the Atlas, you only have tier 1s, right? So all these lines mean something, and it's important to know for your shaped strategies. So the low tier magic finding strategy, I actually made another video on this, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit here. Say I want to run tier 3 burials as my map. I will still drop marshes, even if I don't have marsh on my Atlas. That is always going to happen, unless I shape marshes to tier 7, but it's not important. When a map drops, it can only be downgraded. It cannot be upgraded. This is a little bit confusing because the Atlas bonus here says 74% chance for maps to drop 1 tier higher. This is already accounted for when a map drops. So if I got a marshes drop when I'm running burial chambers with 74% Atlas completion, then the marshes would never in any situation have been a burial chamber because it already applied this bonus. That means it was either upgraded by the 74% from a graveyard into a marshes, or it failed the 74% upgrade for burial chambers. It hit that 26% where it doesn't get upgraded. Now that doesn't mean you need 100% Atlas completion. What 100% Atlas completion would mean is that if I'm running burial chambers, I will never drop graveyard because every single graveyard will be upgraded to a marshes, and I will still drop marshes because all of these graveyards are being upgraded into marshes. Also all the dungeons and beaches and lookouts. All of the marshes will be upgraded into burial chambers, and all of the burial chambers will be upgraded into relic chambers. If you remove relic chambers from the Atlas, you will still drop relic chambers because it's connected. But you can disconnect it by utilizing a Shaper's Orb. So when relic chambers is a tier 9 map, it can only drop for you as a tier 9 map. If you're running a tier 3 map, it's impossible to drop a tier 9 map. So hopefully that makes sense. What this means is if we shape relic chambers and we run tier 3 burial chambers and we remove every other tier 4 on the map because none of the other tier 4s are connected to burial chambers, every single map that's a tier 4 now gets downgraded into a tier 3 map. And that's a way that you can sustain any low tier map easily on the Atlas. This also applies to high tier maps, but it's a little bit harder to utilize. So to expand on that, if I want to run tier 3 burials and tier 3 volcanoes, what I can do is I can shape ley lines into tier 8. That means that ley lines will never drop when I'm running my volcanoes. I can shape sulfur vents into tier 10. That means that sulfur vents will never drop when I run volcanoes because volcanoes is a tier 4, it can't drop tier 10s. I make burial chambers my tier 3, and I shape relic chambers. So now when I'm running burials, relic chambers never drops. That means all of the tier 4 maps become volcano, as long as I have no other tier 4 maps on my Atlas. And all tier 3 maps become burial chambers. And you can utilize this strategy for every single tier on the Atlas. You can keep going up, as long as it's only connected to one map. There's a lot of questions I get about what if it's connected to 2 maps. A great example is Haunted Mansion. It's connected to Wharf and Academy, but there's only one Shaper's Orb for tier 11, so you can't shape Academy and Wharf to tier 11. If you have your Elder Orb unlocked, the tier 16 shaped map, which I'll explain how to get that in a minute, but if you have that, you can shape Wharf to tier 16, you can shape Academy to tier 11, and then you'll still get it. This strategy will not work unless you have that orb, because if you shape Wharf to tier 11, when you run your Haunted Mansions, you're still always going to get tier 6 drops of Academy. And these tier 6 drops are going to eat into your Haunted Mansion drops, because now your tier 6s are no longer downgrading, they're all staying as Academy, even if you have no T6s unlocked on your Atlas. Whew, that's confusing. You might have to watch that over. It's very in-depth, and it's a little bit of a endgame strategy, but it's important to know. So how do you get your Elder Orb if you want to farm your Elder Orb? So the way you get your Elder Orbs is you need to unlock all 15 of Zana's memory fragments. The first 10 of these are obtained from running Elder influenced maps of the corresponding tier higher. So, you know, your tier 2 shape or your second Shaper's Orb, your tier 7 Shaper's Orb would be from Elder Residence influenced tier. Then the third would be from Courtyard, so on and so forth, all the way up to tier 15. You can get these with Shaper Orbs, like I talked about before. And once you've got the first 10, your final 5 Shaper's Orbs, which they don't upgrade to tier 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. What they do is they are additional orbs on previous tiers. So you get multiple tier 8 orbs, or maps that upgrade tier 8 maps into tier 13 maps, multiple orbs that upgrade tier 9 maps into tier 14 maps, and multiple orbs that upgrade tier 10 maps into tier 15 maps. You can use these to do the same strategy, but once you have all 15 of those, you'll get a quest from Zana to defeat Shaper. When you defeat Shaper, you can then go into Zana's laboratory Shaper's laboratory in the Templar laboratory. The door is right here. And when you go in there, Zana will give you the Elder Orb, which is your tier 16 orb. This orb is extremely valuable. It allows for some really cool Shaper or Atlas strategies. I really, would recommend getting it at some point. It's a big grind to get, though. You do not need to defeat Uber Elder to get it, though. So that's really nice. So anyways, once you have that orb, you've now unlocked the ability to do much better low tier strategies because there are no multiple orbs for those. So for example, Toxic Sewers, you could run tier 5s. You could upgrade Cemetery into a tier 11, upgrade Phantasmagoria into a tier 16, remove all of your tier 6s and tier 5s, and then you could sustain tier 5 Toxic Sewers if that's just a map that you really like. These maps that I'm mentioning, I'd like to reiterate that you should not think of them as maps that I'm recommending you run. They're just general maps, as examples. And in the future, map buffs and nerfs will happen. The good maps will no longer be good, and some maps that people considered bad before will now be the new maps. Leagues down the line, it's impossible to say what the new good maps will be. Even in the next league, I couldn't tell you what the new maps will be. And a great example of this is Underground Sea. This map was considered to be complete and utter dumpster because of the layout a while ago, but when they made nerfs to density in some other maps, Underground Sea got buffs in density, and now it's the best tier 11 everyone considers. So it's important to keep those things in mind. It's also good to remember that you should just run whatever map you really enjoy. For example, I love Canyon. So at some point, I might run tier 4 Canyons. I might set up that Atlas strategy where I shape Spider Layer into tier 10. I remove all tier 5s and tier 4s, and I'll just run Canyons because it's such a nice linear layout. It feels good to run. Even though it doesn't have a good divination card, it really doesn't matter. Okay, so now that you understand the Atlas mechanics, there's 3 typical Atlas strategies I'd like to talk about. So the first is Elder farming. The second is Shape strategy, and the third is low tier MFing. As far as Elder farming, this strategy generally involves unlocking every single map on the Atlas, or the vast majority of the maps on the Atlas, and just chasing Elder around, making your Elder expand as fast as possible. So as soon as there's a Shaper map you can expand him on, you grow him to 20 maps so that he spawns, you kill Elder, you farm the bosses for money, you probably are going to be doing Shapers if you're doing the strategy, things like that. It's a great way to make currency. It gives you a wide variety of maps. Good strategy. I would highly recommend it to people who like running the wide variety and fighting bosses. The second is the shaped strategy. This is probably the most typical strategy, and it kind of involves running the same map over and over and over and over. So something that people often ask me in my stream is, how do you not get bored running the same map over and over? Well, I don't get bored because that's what I like to do in this game. I just really like to get in tune with the layout and spam this map, and the more often that I'm running it, the more I'm going to be familiar with the layouts. I'm going to notice little, because the game uses procedurally generated layouts, so they're pseudo-random. They have little nuances that are random, especially masters, when they spawn, can influence a layout, but they have a lot of similarities. So the more you run it, you're going to notice those little similarities more. You're going to hit dead ends less. It just feels better and better to run it. Plus, you pile up a huge amount of maps, and you can pre-roll a lot of maps, which is really good. For example, I have like 276 volcanoes pre-rolled. Well, not that many because a lot of them bricked when I vaulted them, but I have a bunch of pre-rolled volcanoes, so when I do my mapping session today, I can just take out my maps, I never have to think about it, and just run them. So that's a really nice way to run maps that a lot of people like. When you're doing this strategy, the way you make it work, so I talked about how you can sustain the low tiers before, but now if you're shaping a map, you're already disconnecting that map from the tiers. So what this means is when I run burials chambers right now, I will still drop relic chambers and marshes because they're connected. They're going to be the most common drop maps. You'll notice I didn't remove any other tier 3s or tier 4s because those maps don't influence your higher tier map drops. When I run shape burials, any map that ever drops that's tier 7 or lower could never under any circumstance have been a tier 8 shaped burial chambers. It's impossible. That's how the Atlas works. When I get a tier 9 map drop, it will always drop as Volcano because it's the only tier 9 that I have unlocked right now. And I could shape Canyon and it would make them all be canyons, or so on and so forth. The reason this is important is because it means you don't have to unlock a bunch of maps. So with this, when I was setting up my Atlas this lead, what I did was I unlocked every map up to tier 7 because I knew I was going for this strategy, and I never unlocked a tier 8 map. The way I got my, well, actually that's a lie. I did unlock one tier 8 map. When I got my burial chambers, I got it from Courtyard, which oddly my Elder is back up here again. But I got my Courtyard. I got my Orb because Elder was on there. I removed Courtyard, and then I shaped burial chambers, and there I'm good to go. My Atlas is already set up. I don't need to go to higher tiers. Good to go. And so same thing with Volcano. I just got it from running a temple. Because I'm in Trade League, I can buy maps. And if you're in Trade League, I highly recommend that you buy maps rather than keep yourself stuck in a situation where you need to get the drops. Certain maps are drop only when you're running the Atlas. So an example of that is when you trade up 3 Toxic Sewers, they trade into Cemetery. No map trades into Phantasmagoria. So the only way to obtain Phantasmagoria if you're in that Soul Self-Found is getting it as a drop from Bone Crypt, Toxic Sewer, or Dunes, or from Zona missions. If you're in Soul Self-Found, I personally would recommend getting maps from Zona missions, the ones that you don't get as drops, and just progressing through the tiers because they've changed how Atlas or maps drop now. The way that they used to drop is that if you ran an ancient city and you didn't have fields unlocked, but you did have Ashen Wood unlocked, it was a 50-50 chance that it could drop as Ashen Wood or fields. Now, the way that it works is you're more likely to drop maps that you do not have completed. What that means is if it's a fields and an Ashenwood, if I run Ancient City and I have Ashenwood unlocked, but I don't have fields unlocked, I'm more likely to drop fields than I am to drop Ashenwood. We don't know the exact ratio, or at least I don't know the exact ratio, but you're more likely to get the fields. So you can utilize this. In this case, fields, you could just 3-to-1 Ancient Cities into it, but you can utilize this by running maps that are connected to it, and eventually you'll get it. If you're not racing, you should never feel obligated to move up through the tiers. You can just do it gradually as it works best for you. That being said, you don't have to think about that too much. Sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but the third Atlas strategy is low tier MFing. We talked about that earlier, how you can remove these maps. This is the strategy that I've used a lot in previous leagues when I die. If you wanted to set your Atlas up for this, you would want to keep in mind which maps you're planning on running from the get-go. So if I wanted to Magic Find in Peninsula, actually it's a bad example. It's really hard to sustain this because Strand and Canyon are both connected. Well, that's actually a good example, I guess, because Peninsula would be an example of a map you probably don't want to choose for this. But if I wanted to start out my MFing in Arcade because it drops the 2 Exalted Orb Divination card, then the way I would do my Atlas is I would unlock all tier 1s and all tier 2s. I would unlock Arcade as my tier 3. I would unlock Courthouse as my tier 4. And then I would unlock all tier 5s, all tier 6s until I got my Elder Orb. If you're in Shaper Orb, sorry. If you're in Trade League, you would want to buy the maps you need to get your Shaper's Orbs. The reason you do this is that it's going to be much faster and much more efficient than trying to push through the Atlas on a Magic Find character. That's very difficult. You might even want to wear non-MF gear while you're working on your Atlas to get it set up and then switch to MF gear later on. But anyways, and then I would shape Courtyard into a tier 9. I would already have no tier 3s and no tier 4s, and then I could just run arcades. Every single tier 3 and tier 4 map would downgrade to arcades. You're good to go. That's the other Atlas strategy. Just choose one of the three. Those are the ways to kind of set them up, in my opinion. As far as the shaped Atlas strategy, it's most common to do this in red tiers. Like I said, the popular map right now is Underground Sea. So what you would do is you would shape Underground Sea to tier 11, you'd shape another map that you like to tier 12, or maybe shape no map to tier 12 because you want the tier 12 maps to downgrade to Underground Seas. Then shape another map to tier 13. When you kill the boss of Underground Sea, you're going to get that tier 13 map sometimes, and you'll build up your pool through that. Alternatively, you can progress into the red tiers. Let me show you the full atlas. So if we progress into the red tiers here, you could, for example, unlock all tier 11s, all tier 12s, all tier 13s, and all tier 14s, and then run a shape tier 15. And this higher atlas bonus is going to give you a higher chance of getting tier 15s when you drop them. You could also do it with a tier 16 if you have that Elder Orb. If you want to run a specific red map, for example, Layer is a really good red map. It's actually almost impossible to 100% sustain it as a tier 11 because it's connected to Necropolis and Racecourse. So even if you upgrade Necropolis into a tier 16, you're still going to get Racecourses as every single tier 12 drop, which is probably better off than having Necropolis drop as a tier 12. But that being said, you could upgrade Layer into a tier 16, and when it's a tier 16, you'll still get Necropolis and Racecourse drops. You'll still get Bog drops from tier 10s, tier 12s, and tier 12s. But none of these will be eating into your Layer drops. What does this mean? If you have no tier 16 maps unlocked, you have all tier 15 and under unlocked, usually that is enough to sustain a tier 16 shaped map with lead mechanics considered. So now I'm going to talk about sustaining maps. Actually, before I talk about this, let me talk about one more thing. So this is an example of a map where you could sustain a red map without having to upgrade it to tier 16. So if you wanted to run tier 11 Spider Forest because of the Doctor card, you could make Castle Ruins a tier 16, and Spider Forest would function as a shaped tier 11 map, meaning it would function the same as Underground Sea, for example, when you have it shaped to tier 11. Because every single tier 12 map would get downgraded into tier 11 maps. You would drop Arachnid Tombs, which would eat into your tier 10 maps, but that doesn't matter if you already have all tier 10s unlocked. Maybe a little bit confusing, and again, I apologize. It's a very complex system. This is a long video. But the last mechanic I'd like to talk about is sustaining maps. This is the most asked question in the game for me since I started streaming. How do you sustain maps? Well, there's no simple answer for that, but there are a lot of things you can do to sustain maps, and before you are looking to sustain maps, you should keep in mind that this often will not happen on your first 10 or 15 maps. It might take 20, 30, even 40 maps before you start to sustain, but you want to do every single thing that is in your power in order to sustain. So, what things can you utilize? The first and most important, I would say, are alchemy orbs. If you're running your maps blue from transmuting and augmenting, you're going to have a much harder time sustaining because, let's take a random map, for example, here. Let me grab 2 Coral Ruins. So first, if I transmute the Coral Ruins, we see it's got 2 modifiers. It has 12% pack size, 32 quantity. Now if I alchemy orb a Coral Ruins, it's got 20% pack size and 52 item quantity. So obviously, this is almost double the amount of items you're going to be getting back. And this isn't even a fully modified map. With blue maps, you can only have up to 2 modifiers, but with yellow maps, you can have up to 6 modifiers, and Vol Orbs can potentially make it into 8. I wouldn't recommend Voling maps if you're not 100% familiar with how to utilize Vols best, but this is very important for sustaining. Even in the lower tiers, if you can get alchemy orbs, it's going to be better. If you loot all of the unique items when you're playing solo self-found, you'll get a lot of alchemy shards, and it'll add up to a lot of alchemy orbs. If you're in trade league, I highly recommend buying alchemy orbs and always alching your maps once you get above the white tier maps, or tier 6 or higher. You should probably be alching every single map. The next most important thing, in my opinion, is chisels. If you do not have a good map pool yet. Like if your map pool is looking like my coral ruins here, where you got like 11 of these and you're trying to sustain this map or whatever, you want to chisel that map. Buy chisels. If you're in solo self-found, save your chisels for the maps that you need to sustain. This is not 100% true, but it's how I personally like to do it. The reason being, chisels add 5. Oh, actually, this is really important because someone in my chat wasn't aware of that. So if you use a chisel on a white map, the quality increases by 5. That increases the item quantity by 5. If you use it on a blue map, the quality increases by 2. So less than half as effective. Do not chisel maps when they're blue. And even worse, if you use it on a yellow map, quality increases by 1. So 1% item quantity. So if you're going to be using chisels, you always chisel before you roll the map. So you get that 5%. You don't necessarily, if you're poor, don't do another chisel right now. See, it's 18 quality. That's good enough. Save yourself that 4th chisel. Don't waste it. If it's 0% quality, you can get it to 20%. That's totally fine. But don't delete those chisels. It'll eat into your money really fast, and it'll make your overall returns much lower. The next most important thing, in my opinion, for map sustain is the lead mechanics. So in the current lead, we're on incursion. Incursions are this super cool mechanic. Anyone who's watching this in the future, I feel bad that you missed this lead. It's amazing. But you build a temple. So when you run your incursions, they can drop maps. All the monsters inside count as regular monsters, and they can drop maps just like any other. But when you run the temple, it's kind of like a giant map that you didn't even have to pay for. You didn't put a map in. So if I run a bunch of my shaped volcanoes and I open up a temple and I clear every single room in this temple, I'm probably going to get 5 to 10 shaped volcanoes back. And then there's rooms in here that actually drop more maps. I don't have them in this current temple, but there's a map room in the temple that if you get to level 3, you can get a bunch of maps back from it. In the previous league, Bestiary, beasts dropped maps. In the league before that, Abyss, the Abyss chests dropped maps, and the Abyssal Depths dropped maps, and I'm pretty sure the rare monsters did too. In the league before that, Harbinger, all of the Harbingers dropped maps, all the mobs they spawned. So those things, if you utilize the league mechanic, it's going to massively increase your map sustain. This will apply to most league mechanics in the future too. They might release a league that doesn't increase map drops, but since I've started playing in Breach League, every single league has had at least some way to influence your map drops with the league mechanic. Now the final step you can use for increasing your map drops is sextants. Now, sextants are very confusing for a lot of people, and this is how I recommend doing sextants. So, I'm running volcanoes right now. This is my strategy that I've been doing for this league to make money. I'm not going for 100 as like a speed push. I'm currently level 98, but it's not really I'm not pushing for 100. But anyways, that being said, when you sextant a map, you want to look for ones that add monsters to the map, because the more monsters on the map, the more maps you're likely to get back. So if you use a sextant and you get player's life and mana recovery from Flask's instant, an area contains additional monsters that heal, this directly translates into maps in the long run. If you get the one that increases onslaught effect, that's not going to give you any maps. It's not even going to give you any items. So always be trying to get things that give extra monsters. The barrel sextant also drops a lot of maps. It drops a lot of currency. So if you're going to be sextanting, you want to get the good mods. Now, the reason I list these as the last thing is because sextants are not a guaranteed profit in the short term. Even in the long term, you can potentially lose money by sextanting. I would still highly recommend doing it, at least when you're early on. So for example, if you have 3 of the shape map you want to run, I would recommend putting a sextant on, or 2, getting 2 mods that add extra monsters to the map, and then running those maps. Maybe even saving up your initial 3 shape maps so that you can run all 3 with a sextant back to back to back. You're going to be much more likely to sustain. So if you utilize all those mechanics, you should have a much easier time sustaining. I really apologize for the length of this video, guys. I actually intended it to be much shorter, but the thing about the Atlas is there's just so much to talk about. And even this video, I'm not able to cover every single thing I would like to discuss, and I went on a lot of tangents. I really apologize for that. Hopefully the video is still useful and informative. I'm going to be linking in my stream, and I'll probably look into making some timestamps for this as well. Like I said, it's a little bit tangential. It goes all over the place, but hopefully you guys all learned something and you enjoyed this video. And thank you all so much for watching. I will be streaming later today and every other day, so come check out the stream. Feel free to ask me about this video or my others, or even just come and hang out, and maybe you can learn some things. Thank you very much, and have a great night, everyone.